Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome to today's Daf Yomi. We begin a brand new Masechta, Maseches Nedarim. Says the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Kol kinuyei Nedarim kinedarim. Now the Ran will provide for us a short introduction to the Masechta. Now, incidentally, the Pirush that you will notice running alongside the right of our Daf, labeled Rashi, many commentaries point to the fact that it doesn't seem that this is the real authentic Rashi. In fact, we find many inconsistencies and contradictions between this Pirush, which is allegedly Rashi, and the real Rashi found throughout Shas. So in fact, in Sefer Binyan Shloimeh, he quotes Rabbeinu Betzalel Ashkenazi, the Baal Shita Mekabetzes, the one who compiled the Shita, who says that in fact this is not the authentic Pirush Rashi, but fortunately for us, recently they did discover a manuscript, a Ksav Yad, which appears to be the real authentic, genuine Pirush Rashi on Maseches Nedarim, and in fact it was incorporated into the newer version of the Oiz V'Hadar Shas, the Mesifta Shas. So we have the Rashi Ksav Yad on the side as well. But throughout the generations, the primary mefarish that was learned with Nedarim was the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, one of the Rishonim, which runs along the left side of our Gemara. So we'll try to sort of make a conglomerate between the Ran, the new Rashi, the old Rashi, the Rosh, the Tosfos. We'll pick up the main points as we go along. Now, why in fact, was Rashi sort of deleted from Nedarim up until late? So listen to the words of Rabbeinu Neturoi Goin, one of the Goinim. He writes in his Sefer Halachos Psukos, he says, look, it's been already 100 years since they have taught Nedarim in the yeshivas. Apparently they neglected to learn Nedarim in yeshivas. It wasn't part of the curriculum, for whatever reason, whether because it's Neder, Kachim related, isn't so relevant. For whatever reason, apparently they did not really dwell on Maseches Nedarim in the yeshivas, and that perhaps explains, why Nedarim was sort of neglected, in which case Pirush Rashi was sort of lost by the wayside. Okay, so the Ikar, we're going to focus on Ran and pick up other points from the other Mefarshim as we go along. So back to the Mishnah. Kol kinui Nedarim kunedarim. Ran points out that typically there are two types of neder. We're used to speaking about a neder in terms of hegdish. You take an item and you commit it to the Beis HaMikdash, whether to the Bedek HaBayis, which is the building fund, or to be used as a carbon, Kedushas HaGuf, to the Mizbeach. This Masechta, says the Ran, our forthcoming Maseches Nedarim, will not discuss these types of Nedarim. Rather, a topic of conversation will be Nidrei Isser, a different type of Neder. So when it comes to Nidrei Hegdish, that only pertains to an item that I own, which I can now give over to the Beis HaMikdash. Once I do that, it affects anybody. Nobody can benefit from that item. It becomes hegdish. So it has to be mine to begin with, but then it becomes usher to everybody. In contrast to Nedarim discussed in this Maseches, Nidrei Isser, where basically I'm taking any sort of item or food, whether it's mine or belonging to another person. I'm saying like this, I'm declaring, I'm committing, B'Lashon Neder. Look, the use of this item will be off limits for me. The consumption of this food is off limits to me. So I'm making the use, the benefit, the enjoyment of this item or food usher to me. Now this can apply to an item that belongs to somebody else as well. It doesn't have to be mine. My neighbor's food is usher to me. So that's one difference between this and Nidrei Hegdish, which only applies to my item. Here it applies to anybody's item. Number two, Nidrei Isser is personal. Nidrei Hegdish makes it usher on anybody. It belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. Nidrei Isser is personal. I will not benefit from that. I will not eat that. It only affects me and nobody else. So two differences between Nidrei Hegdish and Nidrei Isser. Next, along the run, he goes on to elaborate on three types of neder. You have the Ikar Neder, as he calls it, straightaway Neder. Consuming this item is forbidden to me. Use of this item is usher to me. I expressed it clearly, all out, no ambiguity whatsoever. That's Ikar Neder. That's the primary form of expression of Neder. Then we have kinuyin and yadais. Kinuyin means like sort of an off-brand way of saying it, like a nickname. Instead of shloima, shloimi. So typically, you would say, well, this thing is usher to me like as though it's a korban, right? It's one way of saying nidre isser. Instead of korban, I say koinam, koinach, koinas. Why would I say that? So the Gemara gives us two possibilities. Rabbi Yehuda says these are just lashon nachrim, sort of foreign languages, or as the Ran explains, they would just sort of pervert the word instead of calling it with a proper name korban. It sort of turns into like a nick way of saying it, koinam, koinach, a short form of saying it. According to Rish Lakish, actually the Chachamim invented these terms so that we don't get involved in saying the word korban outright. You know what's wrong with saying korban? Because korban is sort of synonymous with Hashem, korban Hashem, and at times, you know what might happen? He might say Hashem and then just get a phone call and forget to say the word korban, in which case he said Hashem for naught. So the Chachamim suggested that we use these terms, koinach, koinam, to avoid getting involved with the word korban, which might lead to Shem Shemaim Levatala. So that's a kinui, sort of a nickname, way of referring to the neder. Then we have yodais, a handle. An incomplete expression, sort of a short form expression. He initiated expression of neder, but didn't conclude, didn't elaborate, didn't explain himself properly. It's like a handle of a kli. You grab the handle, you expect the whole pot to come along with you. These are three versions of neder. All three are applicable. All three work. All three activate a neder. Ikar haneder, outright. Kinuin, sort of a nickname. And yodais, short form, handle of the neder. It says the Mishnah. Kol kinuyi nedarim kinedarim. If one expressed his neder commitment using a kinui, look, this bread should be like a koinam to me. This bread should be koinas to me. A kinui for the word korban, it works. In which case he's committed to refrain from eating that item. And we know the pasuk says when a fellow commits himself by way of a neder, there was a mitzvah asay to fulfill your commitment. Your words count. Your words are committal. You have to stand by your neder. You must fulfill your words, and there's a mitzvah loisase for transgressing, violating a neder. Don't profane your words. The word of a yid is halik, has meaning, has relevance. Activate commitment. So kinuy nedarim have the same effect. V'charamim kecharamim. A kinu of a cherem. Ran says this is just another form of isser. We know there's a cherem of hegdish, but in this case, he's just trying to make it usser on him. So instead of saying cherem, clearly he sort of bobbled the word cheres, cherek, cheref. That's also considered a cherem, which makes the item usser on him. Furthermore, ushvuois kishvuois, a kinu for a shvuah. Shvuah is slightly different than a neder. Whereas a neder pertains to the item. This item is off limits to me. The use of this item, the enjoyment of this item, the consumption of this item is usher to me. Shvuah pertains to the person. It relates to the man himself. I will do, I will not do. Sort of an act, an activity pertaining to himself. If he expresses it in a kinoi form, instead of shvuah, clearly he says shvusa, shvuka, shvukuka, it works. Ushvuois kishvuois. And finally, regarding committing to become a nazir, the same idea, unazirus, the kinoi of a nazir. Suppose instead of saying nazir, he says naziach, paziach, kinazirus, it has the same relevance, the same validity, as though he expressed the word nazir outright. So we elaborated on kinoi. Now the Gemara Mishnah sort of shifts over to the other classification of neder called yodais. The Gemara will ask, why didn't the Mishnah actually introduce us to the concept of yodais before we go into examples of yodais? The Gemara will deal with that. But here come several examples of yodais. Again, yod means a short form neder. He initiates that commitment, but doesn't really carry out with clarity what he has in mind. We understand what he had in mind, and therefore it commits him, and the Rush says, otherwise, it's not committal, because devarim shebalev, once somebody thinks up something in his heart, that doesn't commit him to anything. You have to express it. But the chiddush here is that even a partial expression, you initiate that sentence, it's considered as though he expressed it outright. Yodais nedarim have a din of nedarim, examples of which will follow. Ha'imel chaver, Reuven tells Shimon, look, mudvani mimcha, there's a neder between me and you, meaning what you have is usher to me. because of a neder. Mufrashani mimcha. I'm separate from you. Meruchakani mimcha. I'm going to distance myself from you. Shani oichalach, pertaining to any food that I can eat from you. Ushani toim loch, any food that I can taste of yours. It's off limits. Aser, here we have the example of yodos. We understand what he has in mind. He's not slurring, he's not using kinoi, but he's sort of leaving out some, he's not expressing himself clearly. He's sort of speaking in a cryptic form. These two are considered a commitment of a neder. It's called a yad. And finally, we have menuda nidcha. Menuda is like nidu, like cherim. I'm going to be, excommunicated from you. I'm going to associate with you like a person who's excommunicated, meaning I can't involve myself with you. I'm going to disassociate myself from you. So here it's a lashon of distancing, but it's not necessarily something that can activate a neder. It's more personal than item related. So what's the halacha here? Chachamim did not consider that a neder, whereas Rabbi Kiva, he wasn't sure, and he was sort of leaning in the direction of Isser. Choich is like, when you're deliberating, you're scraping your head. So he's sort of scratching his head and concluded lahachmer, let's treat it like a neder. One interesting point that the Ran will point out for us, we said that kinui of shvuos is like a shvuah. So he says shkupka, shvuka, whatever, it's considered like a shvuah. Question, we have a Gemara that a shvuah needs to have Shem Hashem. So the Ran says, well, that's one shita. We're following the other shita that even if he promises, he makes a shvuah without referencing Hashem's name, that too commits him to the shvuah. Says the Gemara on Amud Beis. Kol kinui nedarim k'nedarim, right? Now the Mishnah will give us a comprehensive list where kinui would apply to neder, to cherem, then to shvuah, then over to nazir. Ma'ish no gabi nazir. To look tani lulukulu. Take a look at our next Masechta coming up, Masechtas Nazir. The Mishnah also begins with a kini of Nazir takes hold, takes effect. But it stops there. It doesn't proceed to the other categories of, Cherim, and Shvuah, and Neder. So what's the difference? Maishna, why is it that Gabi Nazir, the like Tani Lulakulu, we have no elaboration, no discussion about any other application other than Nazir? Or Maishna Gabi Nedarim, Dik Tani Lulakulu, as opposed to Nedarim by us, we go through all four categories. Kinui, concept applies to Neder, to Cherim, to Shvuah, to Nazir. Answer is like this. Mishum de Neder or Shvuah ksivi Gabi Adadi. We take a look at the Pasuk. Pasuk bundles Neder and Shvuah with each other. Ki Yidar Neder Lashem, Oy Hishava Shvuah. That's the Pasuk in Midbar Lamed, Pasuk Gimel. So once the Pasuk bundles Neder and Shvuah together, Tani Tartin, so the Mishnah puts them both together. V'kiven the Tani Tartin, once we discuss two, why not finish the list? Tani Lakulu, we go down the list and complete all four. Says the Gemara, but if Neder and Shvuah are sort of partners, V'lisni Kinu Shvuahis Basa Nedarim. Okay, let it go in that order. Start with Kinu Nedarim, then proceed to the parallel, which is Shvuahis. Why do we go from Neder to Cherem and then over to Shvuah? Answer is, the Tana Nedarim, since we started discussing Nedarim, the Mitzvah Chefza Olei. What defines the Isser Neder? It's an item-based Isser, like explained earlier. The consumption of this food is usher to me. The use of this item is forbidden to me. It's item-based. So once we discussed one example of an item-based Isser, we shift over to another item-based Isser as well, which is Cherem. Tana Nami Cherem, we discuss the halacha of Cherem as well, which is likewise an item-based Isser. The mitzvah chefza olei, the item, is usher on him. Lafuki Shvuah, as opposed to Shvuah, which takes on an entirely new meaning. The ka'asar nafshe min chefza. Over there, it's a person-based Isser. I can't do this. I must eat that. So first we conclude the item-based concept, and then we shift over to the other track, personal-based Isurim, which is Shvuah, and as the Rush points out, the fourth thing is Nazir. Question, isn't Nazir item-based as well? The wine is Asr, etc. Says the Rush, no, wrong. How does Nazir work? I commit to being a Nazir. I label myself as Nazir, and once I assume that status as a person, what follows is I cannot have wine. I cannot become tummy. So it is person-based, and therefore belongs together with shvua. So we start with neder, over to cherem, which are sort of matches, item-based isur. Then we shift over to the other track, the person-based isur, shvua, and nazir. Interesting to note, the Ran points out, if it is indeed so, that neder is item-based and shvua is person-based, so these things are so, different. What would follow is that suppose he undertook a neder in a lashon shvua. He says, I'm making a neder to eat that or not to eat that. It wouldn't work. It's a contradiction in terms. You're utilizing an item-based term to commit yourself as a person, or in the reverse. I decided to use a person-based expression, shvua, to activate a neder. So shvua, that this thing is asur on me, would that work? It would seem from the Gemara that it can't. They work differently. How could you mix them up? But it brings from the Ramban that actually can work. You know why? Because although it's not an outright neder, or an outright shvua, because shvua is person-based, neder is item-based, but remember, it's yadais. We have the concept of a handle. Even an incomplete expression can activate a neder. Even an incomplete expression can activate a shvua. So ultimately, I know what he's trying to say. He wants to make this thing asur on him, even though he happened to use the lashon shvua, which is sort of out of step there. Okay, so he didn't express himself properly. It's no worse than yadais, and indeed, says the Ran, in the name of Ramban, even in this case, when he used wrong wording, the neder can work, and the shvua can work as well. Now you'll ask, what's the difference if it's person-based or item-based? It's a little bit of a discussion, but briefly speaking, there are nafkamines in halacha between the neder and the shvua, and it's based on the fact that this is item-based and this is person-based. We're going to see Be'ez Hashem throughout the Masechta. But we have another kasha, which was something we actually alluded to in the Mishnah. When you read the Mishnah, you find something which appears strange. Pasach b'kinui. You start discussing kinui, the nicknames, kol kinui nedarim, right? And then when the Mishnah gets down to elaboration, what does it elaborate on? Now, kinuyin, that's discussed in the later Mishnahs. We have examples of kinui, kainam, kainach, mafarish yadais. Instead, the Mishnah shifts over to yadais. Look, I'm mudar from you. So he's sort of alluding to some sort of, distancing between the two, but he didn't really express himself clearly. That's a yad. So what happened to kinuyin? We started by introducing kinuyin, did not elaborate, then shifted over to yadais. Vesu, another question, yadais inshi? Did the Brisa sort of delete yadais? So one question is, we're shifting from one to the other. Number two, why didn't we introduce yadais to begin with? How could you give me examples without even introducing the concept? Answer, I read behind. Yes, the Mishnah actually was involved in yadais as well. So although we don't actually see it in the Mishnah, we know that Rabbi Yehuda Kessler and his Talmidim was such a high level. What was simple to them is sometimes complicated to us, and they compose the Mishnais in sort of cryptic, short, brief terms, expecting us to understand what they had in mind. And that's why sometimes we have to sort of insert the words in the Mishnah, learn it as though it's missing some words. And you read it like this. We begin with Kol Kinui Nedarim Kinedarim, but then V'Yadais Nedarim Kinedarim. Of course, you have to keep in mind the halacha of Yadais as well. And then the Mishnah goes on to elaborate on examples of Yadais. So it's good. Ask the Gemara. But if we start with Kinuyim, shouldn't we go back and elaborate on Kinuyim first? It's the first item you mentioned. Explain it first. Lifresh Kinuyim Bereisha. Answer is, how does Solik Minei? Actually, we prefer elaborating on the most recently mentioned item. We pick up where we left off, so to speak. So we start with Kinuyim, then we introduce Yadais, and then we right away pick up on Yadais, and then later on go back to Kinuyim. How Mefaresh Bereisha? How does Solik Minei? How Mefaresh Bereisha, the most recently discussed item, is what's elaborated on first. And we find many precedences to this. What items do we use to light on Shabbos? What don't we use? And what does the Mishnah continue? Ein madlikin, elaborating on the most recently cited item. Likewise, what items can you use? What materials can we use for installation on Shabbos? What yes and what not? And what does the Mishnah continue to list? Ein toimnin, what not? We pick up from the last, most recently mentioned item. Same thing with isha yotze. What can an isha wear on Shabbos in the street? What can she not wear? And the Mishnah continues to describe what she cannot wear. Let's say it's an isha. Asks the Gemara, really? Is that an absolute system? You mean to say the Mishnah will never retreat back to the first item mentioned? But Tanan, I have many examples as such. So regarding Yerusha, some relatives have a two-way Yerusha relationship, like a father with his sons. So Noichelen means that the father is Yerush the son, Umanchilin, and he gives over Yerusha as well. When the time comes, it's a two-way deal. Sometimes it's Noichelen, V'loi Manchilin. Like a fellow with his mother. He's Yerush her, but he doesn't give her back upon his death. And then what does the Mishnah go on to explain? The first item. Ve'elu Noichelen Umanchilin. Another example is Yesh Metoros Lebalein. This is a Mishnah we had in Yavamis. So you have an example of an Isha who's mutter to her husband, Vasuris Libmain, but when her husband passed away without kids, she's not really allowed to marry the brother, the Yavam. An example of which is like this. Suppose it's a family of Kehanim, and she's an Almana, so she was able to marry the first husband, the Kohen Hedyot, a regular Kohen, but she's usher to the brother who happens to be a Kohen Gadol. That's one halacha. Mutaris Libmain, Vasuris Lebalein. In the next category, we have an Isha who's mutter to the Yavam, because the Yavam is a Kohen Hedyot who can marry an Almana, but she was usher to her husband who happened to be a Kohen Gadol. And what does the Mishnah go on to elaborate? The first case. Ve'elu mutaris lebalein. We sort of leapfrog back to case number one. Ve'elu mutaris lebalein v'asuris libmain. Another example. Regarding a mincha. So typically a mincha requires oil and levina, sort of incense. So sometimes yesh tu'unos, shem and levina. Sometimes a mincha requires both ingredients. Sometimes it's just one, shem and v'loy levina. Ve'elu tu'unos, shem and levina. Mishnah goes on to list examples which require both. So we're sort of going back to the first item mentioned, not the most recently mentioned item. Another example, yesh tu'unos hagosha, ve'en tu'unos tenufa. Sometimes you take a mincha and sort of make contact with the corner of the mizbeach. That's called hagosha. Sometimes you need the hagosha, but not tenufa, not waving it back and forth up and down. Some minchas are tenufa v'lei hagosha. And what does the Mishnah explain? The first one, ve'elu tu'unos hagosha. Which minchas require hagosha? So we're sort of again backtracking to case number one. Finally, we have yesh b'chor l'nachla ve'en b'chor l'kohen. There are different types of b'chor. There's a b'chor regarding being Jewish, the Pishnayim, the double portion from his father. That has one set of guidelines. Ve'en b'chor l'kohen, but is not considered a firstborn regarding redeeming him for the kohen. That works according to a different set of guidelines. And you have b'chor l'kohen, ve'en b'chor l'nachla, the other way around. You have he's considered for the kohen, but not for the nachla. And what does the Mishnah explain first? Back to case number one. Ve'ezer b'chor l'nachla, ve'en b'chor l'kohen. So we have many examples where the Mishnah chooses to elaborate on the first item mentioned. In contrast to those examples that we had before, including our Mishnah, where we seem to pick up from the most recently mentioned example and to choose to elaborate on that. Answer is, all these that we just mentioned, halein, these, mishum da'av shulei. You see, in all these examples, we have many, many categories. 2, 3, 4, many categories. So it's more than just two. And therefore, in order to avoid confusion, we just go back to the beginning. So first we introduced, the 4 categories. Sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like that, sometimes like that. Right? We have 4 different possibilities. In order to avoid any confusion, we just start all over again and elaborate in order. Mishum da'av shulei, because there are so many variations, mefarish, hahu, the basapal, we choose to elaborate on the first item mentioned. As opposed to our Masechta, Nedarim, we only have 2 concepts to discuss, Kinuyim and Yades. So there's no need to go back to number 1, we just pick up from the most recently mentioned item, which is Yades, and elaborate on that. Question is, but We have a Mishnah discussing what an animal can wear on Shabbos in the street and what it cannot wear. There aren't many variations, just two, yes or no. And what does the Mishnah choose to elaborate on first? The first one. So we see it isn't really an ironclad system that you are proposing. So that takes us back to our question. We're all confused. Which one would the Mishnah choose to elaborate on first? We go in order, go back to case number 1 and go from there, or do we pick up from the last, most recently mentioned item? And says, the more you're right. Sometimes like this, and sometimes like that. El Dafka, there's no exact science. Zimnin Nafar Shahuda Pas operation. At times, the Mishnah chooses to elaborate and explain on the first item mentioned, and go from there in order. Zimnin, and at other times, Hahuda Salak Mafarish Beresha, we choose to explain the most recently mentioned item, such as our Mishnah. And the Ran says, there's no issue of Vativ Charlosh Narumim. Typically, the Chachamim speak sharp, concise, to the point, with clarity. Well, you can pick or choose, whichever system suits you better. Either way, it works and it's acceptable. Okay, let's recap today's daf. The Ran explains to us that our Masechta will deal with Nidrei Isser. We have 3 ways of doing Nidrei Isser: outright, proper expression, or Kinoi, sort of a nickname way of expressing it. And we have Yadais, which is a partial expression, which also works. So the Mishnah discussed Kinuyim, and as the Gemara explained, we have to insert Yadais as well. So we have 2 concepts that we're going to learn, Kinuyim and Yadais. And these apply to Nedarim, to Charamim, which are both item-based halachis, and likewise it applies to Shvuah and Naziris, which are person-based commitments. The Mishnah gave us examples of Yadais, and Kinuyim will come up later on. Now regarding the question why the Mishnah went through all 4 categories in contrast to the Mishnah and Nazir, which didn't. The reason is because Neder and Shvuah go together, and then once we discuss 2, we just complete the list. However, Neder and Shvuah are different items, different types of commitments. So that's why the Mishnah sort of arranged it, that it's Neder and then Cherem, because they're both item-based, and then over to Shvuah and Nazir, which are person-based. Regarding which one of these 2 things, Kinoi or Yad, will we discuss first? It so happens to be that over here, we chose to discuss the most recently mentioned item, which is Yadais, as the Mishnah brings us several examples of Yadais. But sometimes the Mishnah will choose to elaborate, going back to the first case, and go in order from there. That's the first teretz of the Gemara. But actually, tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, the Gemara will give us several more options to explain, the order of the way the Mishnah elaborated on these halachas. All the best to you, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.